Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem, the postmortem of my Blitz game number 255. I was white here, kicked off with e4. Okay, and my opponent plays d6, an unusual move, but not unplayable. I go d4, the normal response, and knight f6. So this is a Pirc defense with d6 and knight f6, and the usual follow-up is g6 and bishop g7, but my opponent has a slightly different way of playing it, and so we'll get to it in a second. I play bishop d3 here. This e-pawn is under attack. The normal way of defending it is with knight c3, but then you get a position where your knights, often you get one knight here and one knight here, and your knights are blocking both of your flank pawns. That's kind of the classical line against the Pirc. And I don't like to block both of those pawns. It's nice to have at least one of them able to support the center or to advance and try and control more squares in the center. So that's why I go with the move bishop d3, and it's a playable option here. And then he goes with e5. Yeah, so this is a point I wanted to talk about. Instead of continuing with the plan, g6, which he could still do at this point, he continues with e5. And at this point, this is more like a Philidor defense, with this line of pawns here and the knight here. So I think Chess Explained calls this a neo-Philidor. I haven't heard that term anywhere else, but that's what he calls it. Anyway, I continue with c3. He's attacking the center, and I want to shore it up. If there's an exchange, I want to make sure I get an extra pawn. I want to have that pawn to recapture, so I have more control of the center. So my opponent goes knight c6. And then probably knight f3 is the normal move here. I was a little bit worried about the pin, but it turns out that this is no big deal. Knight f3, if he pins the knight, then you push on with d5. This is kind of one of the ideas I was missing throughout the game, this idea of d5. And so if we back up for a second, the reason I was worried about the pin is because this pawn is now hanging. Pawn takes, knight takes, and because of the pin, I can't take back. So so I have to do something about that, and it just hadn't occurred to me that d5 would be a good move here. But let's see, where can the knight go? Knight to e7, knight b8. I mean, I get a space advantage here, and probably a pretty good position for white. So that's why that's why knight to f3 is the main move here, and probably the best move. Also, d5 immediately is playable as well. Okay, so we're out of the opening book now, and I played the move bishop e3. And the problem with this move is that my opponent can play d5 now. So what's funny is that first I should have played d5 or allowed, or knight first and then d5, and now my opponent should play d5. So both of us, for the next series of moves, fail to play the move d5. So let's take a look. Why is d5 good for black? I mean, you would think this just wastes the tempo. That pawn went from d7 to d6 to d5. But, well, how can I deal with this? Knight d2. This knight can't come out to its natural square because I put a pawn on c3. Black hasn't helped me out by taking and allowing me to recapture and freeing up a space for my knight. He's just pushed on with d5. If I take on e5, let's see, there's two different ways to take here. I could take on e5, threatening his knight. Knight takes e5, hitting my bishop. And now knight to f3. He gets the bishop pair in this line. And knight takes e4. And he picks up a pawn too. I'll probably get the pawn back, castles. Or maybe I play for compensation for the pawn. But in any case, black is better. So it looks like taking the e-pawn is not a good idea. If I take the d-pawn, take that way, then queen takes d5, and he's hitting this loose he's hitting this loose pawn over here. And if I play knight f3, he can play e5 and e4 and fork the knight and the bishop. So I'm in a little bit of trouble here. It says bishop f1 needs to be played, and if you're playing backwards moves like that, you know your opening has gone bad. So d5 is a bit of an annoying move here. What's the engine recommend? The engine recommends knight d2 is the best way to play it, just shoring up the center. And then e takes d4, c takes d4, Knight takes e4. Yeah, he just picked up a pawn. Yeah, I guess I get the pawn back. But I have an isolated pawn now, and he has active development for his pieces. King f1. and it looks like I can't even block here. Oh, if I block with the bishop, I'm dropping the I'm dropping the d pawn. So I move the king to try and hold on to my pawn. So this is all bad for white. So that means backing up to this point, I really need to play either d5 or knight to f3, immediately reinforcing the center with the knight. And this bishop e3 is just not a good move. I guess one thing it does is, no, I'm not sure why it's so bad. I mean, I was thinking, well, maybe it's because it blocks the defense of the e-pawn, but there's no rook behind it to defend that pawn. You'd think knight f3 does pretty much the same thing. But let's check this out. After knight f3, suppose he plays d5 here. Then I can play knight takes e5. That's the difference. So the bishop on e3 just doesn't have as many good options as a knight on f3 does. Okay, so that's for some future game. Try and remember that. I played bishop e3, and he didn't push d5 either. He played bishop g4, and now you'll see for the next few moves the engine keeps saying, why don't you guys why don't you guys play d5? If you're white, why don't you play d5? And if you're black, why don't you play d5? Although here it likes f3. I played the move queen to d2, just reinforcing this bishop, and getting out. Of course, he's attacking my queen, so I had to go somewhere. Once again, d5 could be played. He develops his bishop instead. I kick the bishop and play g4. And so the bishop retreats. And now, once again, I should play d5, but I don't. I play f3. And now, once again, black should play d5. So it's a constant theme in this game. It's a little different here. Let's check it out. d5. Bishop b5. How about if I just take on d5? I mean, I was playing this move f3 to support the e-pawn. Knight takes, hitting my bishop. Knight e2, just developing and supporting the center. Knight takes d4. Knight takes d4. Bishop to h4 check. Okay, it's because I've created all of these weaknesses over here. It's good for black to just open up the center, and he can castle quickly. And after this check, I'm not going to be able to castle, it looks like. I can play bishop f2. Bishop takes d3. Queen takes d3 and castles. So I could castle too, right? Bishop takes. Rook takes. It's a long line. I mean, white has better development and more harmonious placement of his pieces, but looks like the immediate knight f4 is going to pose some problems. Anyway, the line continues. That would be a different game. So my opponent fortunately refrained from playing d5. And once again, I should play d5 to equalize. So if we go on for a few more moves. And right here, this d5 at this point would actually be, looks like a winning move for white. So let's check out this d5. d5, driving the knight back to b8. It could go to a5, right? So what's the danger? Knight a5 and g5, hitting this knight. And this knight goes to h7. And b4, hitting this knight. Okay, so this knight is trapped on a5. That's the problem. It has no good squares to go to. The bishop and knight control c4. Can't come here, can't come here, here. Okay, so I can buy that. So after d5, the knight should retreat to b8. Then g5, kicking the knight again. Knight h7. And knight to b5. So it looks like this is just good active play for my pieces. Interesting. After he castles queenside, I was worried about my kingside collapsing over here, and I wanted to get away from it, so I castled. And now once again he should play d5, but he went on with h4, and once again I should play d5. But I moved my king to safety, so a6, knight c2, Knight b8. It's just funny how neither of us wanted to play the move d5. It's yeah, it's something I should have thought about. Sometimes I don't like to close the position like that. I mean, it eliminates the possibility they might take on e5 if I push d5. But I can follow up with push of the c pawn. It looks like the position won't close up. So, well, I use the knight, this d5 square for my knight. He takes. And now we get an exchange of some pieces in the center. Thought I was doing okay here. Yeah, I guess the engine thinks it's all right. About even. He goes after this pawn, which is a bit weak. And now d takes e5 is the best way to defend that pawn. The way I played it is c4. Okay, that's still a move. And then he goes bishop to f6, putting some pressure here. And now d takes e5 once again to be good. But I decided to push on with c5. So this is maybe my downfall here. The c5 move is not good. Because, well, it hangs the e-pawn, which I was aware of, the d-pawn rather. But I thought I would get counterplay against his king with the open c-file. So this is a pawn sack that didn't work out, basically. So I take, I get my pawn back, and I'm threatening here. But he can just grab this pawn, and I'm just a pawn down now. But I keep up the pressure on the c-file. And now he should play e takes d4. Okay, he did play that. And I threw on this move g5 rather than responding immediately to this threat. I attack his bishop. And now queen takes a2 check. This is some crazy tactic. King takes is forced. And knight here. Ah! So, yeah, my queen is completely loose. It's not even defended. Sometimes in these tactics, you know, you grab a pawn, but you lose a piece at the end because the queen is defended. But here, the queen is completely loose. Okay, so we both missed that one. But also, he could have just taken the bishop here with the pawn. Instead, he took with the knight. And that's a mistake because it allowed me to get in. This move takes c7 and at least get one of my pawns back. So that's a tip, is always look for these intermediate moves. If they come with check, you know, then your opponent has to respond to the check first. Then you can continue. So now I can grab the bishop. He takes back. And rook takes f7. Yeah, I couldn't find anything better, and I was thinking, well, maybe I can double my rooks on the 7th rank there. Queen b4. So, yeah, black is just better here. I'm down a pawn, and I'm kind of struggling to find compensation. So, queen e4 is the recommended move here. Oh, that's good. It threatens to checkmate on b7 there. So after queen e4, queen b5 to defend. He's still going to line up and attack my my b2 pawn. So anyway, I grab a pawn. He goes queen b4. Knight e2, trying to get my knight into the game, which has been sitting there on g1 since the beginning. And so he attacks on the b file, but he had something better here. Yeah, somehow after rook takes f7, he should have played on with rook c6. Rook c6. Let's explore this, because it seems like he gives away his advantage somehow. Knight e2, rook hc8. So he doubles on the c file, and now that kind of forces an exchange. But then he gets control of the c file with his queen. So I've got to play something like queen to c2. There's the knight's controlling that square. Knight there, queen there, queen there. So these squares are all controlled. So he's not threatening checkmate. So rook e7. Queen takes f3. Okay, so looks like white is doing well here. He's got control of the c file. He's got threats on the back rank here, and also I have a lot of loose pawns. a3 is required here to give my king some space, and then he can check on h1. And yeah, looks good for black. So instead of that rook c6 idea, he played the move queen b4, just going for simple checkmate on b2, lovely, with bringing his rook over to the b file as well. I develop my knight. He brings a rook over, and then I play b3 to try and stop the checkmate. Rook d8. And, of course, black is slightly better, but he had a much stronger advantage earlier. a5. And now, after a5, it's all even. So he's still trying to break down the b file. It's a little bit too slow to break down this defense on the b file, apparently. So queen b5 is recommended. Going for an exchange of queens. Okay, and then going into an endgame where he's a pawn up. That's probably a winning approach. Okay, so after a5, I get to grab this pawn on h4. And a4, I have just enough time to take on d4. But what I missed here was there's actually a winning move with the knight. Knight takes d4 is much stronger than rook takes d4. So let's look at knight takes d4. Now, after knight takes d4, one idea is knight here check. And I'm winning his rook. So he needs to do something about that. It says knight to d5. Okay, so that blocks the view of the queen here. Still knight c6 check. B takes c6. And rook takes b4. Oh, so it was a double threat. The knight c6 check threatens two things. It threatens queen takes rook, and rook takes queen. Okay, so knight d4 was a really killer move there. Yeah, exploiting two different discoveries. A queen against a loose rook and a rook against a queen. Wow. Okay, so I took with the rook, which was a kind of a fork. I mean, this equalizes the game at least, and I was happy for that because I'd been down most of the game. So the rook is threatening there with the undefended rook here, and it's also threatening the queen. Although that's not such a big threat because my queen is unprotected here, so rook takes queen is possible. But rook takes d4 is the best move here. Okay, I played it, and I played queen takes d4. Knight takes d4 is still a little better, but queen takes d4 maintains equality, and he can exchange here on b3. Take the queen off. And then this is a drawish endgame. Rook and knight, and well, white has one extra pawn. But they're all loose, and black starts to gobble them up. So starting here. So now the pawns are even, and this should be an even endgame. So king a2, going after his rook. And actually it stays even the rest of the way. Rook d3. Although I was a little bit worried because I do have all these loose pawns, and my knight doesn't have many squares. So there's this threat of knight here check, winning my knight. So move the knight. Rook d2 check anyway. Cancel that. What did he play? Oh, he played knight f5. Rook d2 check was the computer recommendation. Okay, knight f5. I went knight e4. And he grabs a pawn. So he's a pawn up, but you'll see it's still about even. And yeah, it's because I keep grabbing pawns. And he goes rook take h3, staying one pawn up. But the pawns are all gone now. And I discover a neat trick, which if I had found it earlier, well, no, this is the first time I had it. First time I had an opportunity to play this trick. So there is a tactic I played in the game here, which is kind of cute. So if you want to, if you didn't see the game, or if you want to try and figure it out at this point, why don't you pause the video and see if you can find a tactic for white. It's white's turn to move. Yeah, it's kind of a two-mover. It's the combination of two different ideas. I'm giving the answer away now. It's knight here, check, and because the rook covers all of these squares, the king is forced to the A file, and then it's rook to here. And this comes with a double threat. It's threatening checkmate. The knight's covering these squares, so rook there is checkmate, and it's also threatening to take the knight. So I found this during the game. And there's no good defense for it. What he played was trying to stave off the inevitable. So let's just fast forward through a bunch of moves here. I can approach the rook with my king. I just have to stay on the dark squares to avoid his knight coming in here with escaping from the threat with a check. So I had to avoid these light squares here. But I can approach his rook on the dark squares, and then he has to eventually defend against the checkmate, and then I can grab the knight. But you see, this is still dead even. Problem is that a rook and knight against a rook is a draw. And in fact, black is the only one with winning chances here. If he could queen this pawn, he could still win. But I have easy ways to stop that. So I just choose the simplest way, which is to sacrifice the knight for the pawn. And the game was drawn here. So that's how it ended. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I thought it was a pretty interesting fight. And funny how throughout the game, for quite a long span of moves, both of us could have gotten an advantage by playing d5, and neither of us chose to do so. I think that shows one of the weaknesses of blitz chess. In a slow game, you would stop to think and look around for more different moves. And in blitz, you're playing more on instinct, and that's also why strong players do so well in blitz, because they see the moves like d5 so quickly. They can find them even in a blitz game. Okay, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.